Joining us on our election coverage, Jamaal Bowman, the winner in New York, Justice Democrat, going to Congress. How you doing, Jamaal?
I'm well. How y'all doing? Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Jamaal, I want to start with this. I remember you telling a story about how police had wrongly arrested you one time, and there not being enough seats in the cell, and how you having to sit on the floor there, and how frustrating that was. That was in relationship to the stories that were coming out about stop and frisk, but your real lived experience of what you went through. If somebody had come to you as you were sitting on the floor of that jail cell unjustly and told you, hey, don't worry about it, Jamaal. One day you're going to be a United States congressman, what would you have thought?
Hell yes, is probably what I would have thought. I was a pretty self-assured dude in my young 20s. Probably too self-assured, which is why I would get myself into trouble, always opening my big mouth. But to your point, that experience was incredibly dehumanizing. And the more experiences I would have like that, and there were far too many, the less I would believe in what was possible for my own life in terms of, at that time I was a teacher, so I wasn't thinking about running for Congress. I was just trying to be a good teacher, and maybe one day be a school counselor, and then who knows, right? But the more you are terrorized by law enforcement and by the state who's supposed to protect you, the less you feel you have a sense of, the less self-worth you have, the less self-esteem you have, and the less you feel like you're able to accomplish anything. But but my mama, she instilled self-love in me pretty young, man. So that kind of never went away, thank God.
Yeah, no, you got to be of incredibly strong spirit to do the things that you've done. You go through all that experience and you still decide, hey, you know what? I think I'm the right guy to open up a school. I think I'm the right guy to run for Congress. And it turns out you were right on both counts. But let's talk policy for a second, Jamaal. So, you lived the need for criminal justice reform. So, and I know right now the Biden camp has some decent proposals, but do you want to push further? How much further do you want to push? And then I don't know if you thought through the strategy of how to push if leadership says no, now's not the right time.
Well, yes, I want to push further. A couple things we need to do at a federal level. We need to legalize marijuana at a federal level and release everyone who's in prison due to marijuana convictions, and expunge their records and reinvest in the communities in which they come from. So that's number one. Number two, we need to end life sentences. We need to end the death penalty. We need to end solitary confinement. And we need to create a pathway for those who are formerly incarcerated directly toward housing, a job, and immediately re-enfranchise them, in addition to getting rid of all these for-profit stupid fines that they pay upon release from prison. So those are a few things we have to do, in addition to ending qualified immunity, ending the transfer of weapons from the federal government to local governments, ending no-knock warrants, and the list goes on and on and on. So much work to do there. We must reallocate resources toward true public safety, like food security and housing security and jobs. When the hood needed jobs, they gave us police, and that's the problem. And we have to reverse the impact of all of that. So that's part of the work I want to do in Congress.
And as the pandemic basically forces people out of their own homes because they've lost their jobs and they've been left behind without another round of stimulus. I mean, we just desperately need fighters in Congress who will demand more. I mean, the CARES Act was one thing, the more robust unemployment benefits were great, but obviously those benefits have expired, and now you see Americans getting evicted from their homes right now. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. Have you thought about how you plan on working with members of Congress to, a strategy essentially to ensure that there will be another round of stimulus for average Americans as opposed to massive corporate bailouts?
Well, I think it's a huge win for us to pick up at least one Senate seat thus far. If we can pick up 3 more, that would be huge. And obviously, it's easier if Trump loses the White House. But for me, it's about, not just organizing my peers inside of Congress. It's about applying pressure from the outside. And it's about using the power of my voice in the bully pulpit to bring attention to the stories I'm hearing here on the ground in my district and the stories that are taking place across the country. I mean, I haven't even been sworn in yet, and I'm already working with tenants here, pushing back against management companies and landlords who are trying to intimidate them and force them out of their homes. So New York does a lot of good work around rent stabilization and making sure people have legal representation in court. Some of those rent stabilization laws need to be brought to a federal level. But to your point, first and foremost, let's strengthen the HEROES Act. Let's pass it in the Senate, and let's get the resources to the people who need it most. I mean, here in Yonkers, for example, our unemployment rate is triple what it was a year ago at this point because of the pandemic. So much work to be done, and people have so many needs. And tonight is hopefully step 1 towards meeting those needs.
Let me stick with the first policy we're talking about, criminal justice reform, because as you read that list, to progressives' ears, it sounded fantastic, and we would love to get every single thing that you mentioned on that list. And there will be ranges of what the establishment wing of the Democratic Party is willing to accept. By the end of Obama's term, they were still not willing to accept legalizing marijuana, which it blows my mind every time when I think about it. If I assume if there's any hesitation around that good trouble would ensue immediately. Is that a fair assumption?
That's a fair assumption, yes. I'm just waiting for this night to be over, the AP to call our race so that we can get to work immediately. That's the bottom line. And again, this is not about me. This is about common sense. This is about what the majority of American people want. And this is about us establishing ourselves as a moral and humanitarian leader, both domestically and around the world. And enough is enough with the nonsense that's been taking place over the last 50 years. We incarcerate more people per capita than anywhere in the world. Incarceration is torture. I don't care how you draw it up. And we incarcerate race and poverty. And that's just oppressive, and it's a new form of slavery, and it's unacceptable, right? So the work begins tomorrow. We're not even waiting till we get to Congress, because the people here need relief and support, and the people throughout the country need the same thing. So, I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues, and I hope that they are more responsive to the American people. But if they're not, then we have to do what we have to do.
Yeah, and when you get to qualified immunity and solitary confinement, that's where you're going to get a lot more pushback. And that's where we need even more good trouble, but one step at a time, as you rightly say. I'm curious,
but it's crazy. I just want to say, we need more empathy in Congress, right? I'm going to need for my colleagues to put themselves in the shoes of Jacob Blake's. Make believe Jacob Blake is their son. Make believe George Floyd is their child. Make believe Breonna Taylor is their niece. We got to understand that this is hitting home for so many in poor communities and communities of color, and people in Congress are so far removed from that, right? So it's about having conversations from the perspective of, or with the sense of empathy and compassion, and really personalizing it for people. Because how can you support solitary confinement? It's torture, period. And no one in Congress would want their child or their grandchild or their niece or nephew to be placed in behind bars under any circumstances, let alone solitary confinement.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of strength that progressives love to hear. Let's keep it real. Ryan, I want to give you an opportunity to jump in here, and then I have a kind of a mechanics question that I've always been curious about that I want to ask you, Jamaal. But Ryan, go ahead.
Jamaal and I were actually rolling around his district this morning and this afternoon, and one thing you saw or didn't see were in most places were voters, which speaks to the effect of early voting. People have really adopted this as a practice, and I don't think there's going to be any going back. I think and I think it's a better system overall. The idea that if it rained on a particular Tuesday once every 4 years, that you'd have a different public policy direction for a country is absurd, and it does away with these October surprises that people come to regret considering surprises later, like say the James Comey letter just a couple days before the election. So we now, as Jamaal called it today, we have an election season where the last day of voting ends on election day. The next step is for election officials to figure out how to start pre-canvassing those votes, how to start once that you can start counting them when they come in. You just set up a process for that, so that when the polls close, you can announce what those results are, and then you can put all of your resources into counting. Because the reason that we're all up in the air right now, we might be looking at a landslide election for Biden, we might be looking at a win for Trump, and we just don't know, because they don't know how to kind of count this new system that we have.
Yeah. So Jamaal, is it, just to follow up on that real quick, New York does not have the best system of voting when it comes to opening it up for more people to get involved, especially in the primaries. You're going at the federal level, but is there any influence you could do to get New York to be more open in their voting, especially in the Democratic primaries?
Yes, there's a ton of influence. One of the things that I've been telling the elected officials and the organizers that I've been meeting with since we won the primary is we have to do a lot more collaborating with each other, cooperating with each other, and working together to get things done for our districts. What I'm learning is, many work in isolation, and they're more concerned about their sort of day-to-day jobs, and they're not working and leveraging resources of each of their offices to get things done for the district. So absolutely, it's something that I can lend my voice to, I can advocate for, and it's something that needs to happen. To Ryan's point, today we couldn't find voters because early voting works so well. I mean, if we went to 5 places, there was one long line in one area, in one place, and the other spots there were just trickle in voters. But what happened during the early voting season, where the lines were astronomical, they were ridiculous. We had people, I waited 3 hours and 45 minutes to vote the first day of early voting. So we need more sites, we need more machines, we need more poll workers, and we need a better system to count votes as they come in, so that on election night, we could be done with it.
Yeah, a hurricane just hit Nicaragua. There, but for the grace of God, go us. We could have hit Florida and Texas, and then we'd be having a completely different conversation about this election. Jamaal, I've always been curious. You defeated Eliot Engel in the primary, and he was a very powerful Democrat, and obviously was a bit contentious, as any race would be. Have you guys already talked about a transition of constituent services and those type of things?
Yes, I have an amazing chief of staff. Her name is Sarah Idrisu. She's been on board now for about a month, but she's so brilliant and relentless. It's like she's been working with us for a year. So she's been in touch with Congressman Engel's chief of staff in his office, so that the transfer of any cases that they've been working on takes place, and it's as smooth and as just a transition as possible. Because whatever he was working on, we want to pick up and continue to do that work. And we want to also figure out how to continue to leverage resources in the way that he did for this district in particular areas. So those conversations are happening, yes, and so far they're very cordial.
All right, that's fantastic. And by the way, as we were speaking, your fellow Just Democrat Ilhan Omar has won, and that just got announced. So an even larger caucus for the Just Democrats in the next term. Jamaal Bowman.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to like her, Rashida, Alex, and Ayanna like kicking ass tonight. Like I want them to crush their opponents tonight because there's been some money put behind their challengers, and I want like people to see that you wasted your money. You cannot mess around with these badass women who are changing the world. So I can't wait to see those results.
And it looks like AOC's opponent will is at about 24% right now.
So that's ass kicking that you asked for, duly delivered. Ask and ye shall receive. All right, Jamaal Bowman going to kick some ass in Congress. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.